want to thank Dr. Wallace. Thank you for everything. We color coordinated our outfits, which I'm very proud of. And I also want to mention that, my co-founder Bernie told me, he's like, be funny today, be funny. But Dr. Wallace, I'm never going to be able to compete with that. So give her another round of applause, please. Again, we have such a great day planned, and now I'm really excited for our first panel of the day, where we're going to talk about what access to healthy food means for communities. We're joined by Major Emily Diemer, the Research Director for the U.S. Army Baylor University's Master Program of Nutrition. Round of applause. It's nice to see you. Rachel Ferencik, a Senior Director of the Hunger, Nutrition, and Health Action Collaborative at the CDC Foundation. Round of applause. And Selena, Ahmed, the Global Director for the Periodic Table of Food Initiative and the Dean of Food EDU based at the American Heart Association. Round of applause. Before we dive into this conversation, I want to thank a few more of our partners, including Ahold Delhaize USA, Applegate, Bell, Bonterra, Certified Origins, Nyman Ranch, and HHMI Tangled Bank Studios. Round of applause for them, please. So nice to see all of you. Thank you for being here. Rachel, I'd like to start with you if I can. You and I have known each other for a while now. We first met a few years ago when the Biden-Harris administration released its national strategy on hunger, nutrition, and health. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the national strategy and where it's at right now.
Sure, happy to. Thanks so much, Danny, and everyone for having me here today. So back in 2022, the White House had a summit on hunger, nutrition, and health. And as a part of that, they challenged organizations, philanthropy, nonprofits, business to come up with big and bold challenges to end hunger and improve nutrition and health. As a result of that, there were over 200 commitments made, with over $10 billion in public-private dollars committed towards it.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so it covers really, everything from food access, research, physical activity. And we have been helping to make connections between partners, and we started the Hunger, Nutrition, and Health Action Collaborative as a result of that. And we're continuing. As far as we know, hunger has not ended. And there's a lot to do. Many of the commitments won't be completed until after 2026. So what we're doing is we're lifting up the different commitments. We're providing some accountability so that folks report on what they're doing. We have a monthly partner call where we're highlighting different partnerships. And we're doing really everything we can to bring partners together, public, private, multi-sector, to work on this issue.
And as you said, the challenges that we're facing have not gone away because of a new administration. I know you're looking for additional partners and collaborators. Can you talk a little bit about that and how people can become involved?
Sure, happy to. Hunger hasn't gone away. We're just continuing to do this work. And so we have a website, impacthunger.org. And we're trying to create a big tent for anybody to get involved. You don't have to have been a commitment maker. You can learn about what we're doing. You can join our partner calls. You can register there. And of course, we're always looking for funding partners as well to keep this amazing work going. We have a smaller group called a Hunger, Nutrition, and Health and Pregnancy Action Network. So we have a group that's actually focusing on issues specific to women before, during, and after pregnancy and little ones. And we're building kind of a more robust network with that group right now to keep that kind of those communications going and those partnerships going.
That's really exciting and so needed, so useful. Thank you. Rachel, I think one of the things that I was most proud of is working with you over those last 2 years. So thank you for all that. Please give Rachel a round of applause. They've done incredible work. Selena, I'm hoping I can talk to you about the numbers and the data, because I know that's really important to you. In order to continue the access to expand access to healthy food and improve nutrition security, we need reliable data. And I'm wondering if you can talk about where some of the gaps are and what's needed to continue the research. There's a lot we don't know, right?
Absolutely, and good morning. I have a question for the audience. Do you think, raise your hand if you think that we have a comprehensive understanding of what is in our food and what it does for our health? Excellent. And so that is the big data gap, I think, in food systems. We don't know what is in our food. We probably have an understanding of less than 10% of the components that are in food, let alone what they're doing in our bodies and the role that they're playing in ecosystems. And so just that fundamental question of what is in food, how do the components that are in food vary with how food is grown, vary with how food is processed, how it's stored, how it's prepared, and how we're consuming it, and then what it does in our body is a huge data gap. And without that knowledge, it's really hard to precisely manage food systems so they're nourishing for ourselves, for communities, and for the planet.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can dig a little bit more into how, this idea of how food is grown and how that impacts nutrition. Again, there's a lot we don't know, but there is some we do know.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there is all sorts of evidence that the way we grow food based on how we manage soil organic matter impacts, it upregulates what crops are getting. And all of those components that crops have are linked to the ecosystem, and they shift based on the ecology, based on biodiversity, based on our management, and ultimately that's impacting what's in our health. Other exogenous compounds enter food from plasticizers, herbicides, pesticides, also enter our food
Right.
in addition to the way we're processing it. And so to date, there's been lots of robust studies, but each study has been using different tools to actually examine what is in food. And so we haven't had good data in the way that it hasn't been standardized, so we haven't been able to put it together and really see trends globally at scale.
Yeah, I want to get into that standardization point in a little while, but thank you for all of that. Major Diemer, I want to shift gears a little bit because one of the things that I find heartbreaking, and especially with things that we've been hearing in the news, is that, and I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but that food insecurity rates for the people who have served our country, veterans, are at an all-time high in so many places. I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the work that's being done to help this, to make sure that veterans, the people who served our country, are getting the nutrition and food that they need.
Sure, great, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. 2018, it was found that 1 in 4 service members are actually facing food insecurity. And so we've more recently been doing, I think, a lot more work to understand characteristics or risk factors associated with that and where we can leverage nutrition services and registered dietitians like myself to aid those service members and their families, because that's our ultimate mission. So I think one aspect that has helped us identify those needs is implementation of what's called holistic health and force, where we've taken the registered dietitian, the military nutrition expert from the hospital, and starting to embed them in with the units, with the service members. So rather than taking that that reactive approach to nutrition services and care, we are there at the forefront with those individuals where we can start to identify and really understand where the gaps are. And Acess is being one of them.
Right.
So for an example, out at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Tacoma, Washington, right, one of our H2F, that holistic health and force dietitians, was able to identify a food access gap and began an installation pantry in which service members could come, no questions asked, and obtain resources, food, healthy food. And what that's trickled into is now taking it from a smaller unit to the installation itself to include the hospital. How can we support these units, and integrating then our community partners? So really sort of that grassroots identification translating back up to how can we get the community involved to continue to support our service members. So that's just one example.
And it seems really common sense and useful.
Yeah, it does, right? But I think, again, I would say nutrition is our mission, right? That's what we're there and trained to do as military registered dietitians. That's our forefront. And so finally having us embedded with the units that's what we're striving for. We are always going to advocate for healthy food access, quality nutrition, so that our warfighters can maintain their physical fitness and the lethality that we need for future conflicts.
Yeah, and again, it's common sense that food security is national security. Those two
Yes,
things are like
100%.
linked so closely. I want to stay with you for just 1 minute. When we last spoke, you talked about how we need a common language and that language and semantics are really important when we're speaking about these issues. Can you talk about how that happens? How can we create a common language so that we're all sort of understanding things?
I think being here is a great example, right? I think the more that we can leverage partners like Rachel as discussed in those collaborations, the more opportunity we have to at least understand each other, right? That shared understanding is so important, and even sort of microscopically as a registered dietitian, if I'm going to a battalion or brigade commander, they have no, let me backtrack. They have a limited understanding, I should say, of what our perspective is, right? We have to be crafty and tactful on how to bring our message to the forefront. So even internally, we're facing those challenges, but practice and events like this, being able to pick minds of those in the audience, I think is what's going to help us get there.
I love it, crafty and tactical.
You have to be, yes.
That's great. Selena, I want to turn to you because I think this issue of language, semantics, how we're communicating these issues is very important to you. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So more from the education piece, and Emily and I were talking about this before, how do we have that common language? And I think education is so key to that. So the American Heart Association, we have a platform called Food EDU, and it's open access, and I encourage everybody to explore it at some point. We're also working on developing a course for dietitians, again, another open access course, professional education development. And I think starting that education much earlier. And so, for example, I work on the Flathead Reservation in Montana of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes, working on food access projects for the past decade, looking at all sorts of barriers for food access and access to healthy, delicious, nourishing food. And one of the learnings, big lessons from that is really thinking about how do we build that common language and that relationship with food early on.
Right.
So thinking about sort of food sovereignty education for the youth and really building that language not now as adults, but really starting early on. So I think that piece is really critical. In terms of the global language for food, it's also, everybody is speaking a different language. We're using different tools to measure what is in food. And so the project that I steward, which is the Periodic Table of Food Initiative, we've spent the last 3 years just developing standardized ways of answering that question, what is in food? And we're distributing those standardized measurements, ways of looking at food, to labs around the world. I think about it a lot like if we're building a road system and each engineer comes to the table with a different yardstick, a footstick, hands, like using a different measurement, we won't have our bridges connecting, we won't have our roads connecting. And really through this common language, can we really map out our entire food system globally and start to really make more informed decisions.
It's really exciting, and I love what you mentioned about early education and talking about these issues, long before we become adults. That will be a theme throughout the next 2 days, so I really appreciate you bringing that up. This is a question for all three of you. Trust is really important for all of the work you're doing, and to build those partnerships, those collaborations, to get military folks on board, to get companies on board, to get scientists on board. Can you talk about this need for trust? I don't know who wants to go first, but I'm going to look at Major Diemer because I can.
I was thinking it'd be great for Rachel.
I'm happy to start if that's
yeah,
okay. Right, things move at the speed of trust, right? So super important. I think one of the things that I try to remember is that turning to the wisdom of local communities is super important. So whether it's a large company, philanthropy, really listening to what is the real and lived experience at the community level is super important. So I think that's a really important component of building trust, and it takes time.
Yeah, and we haven't done a lot of that in the past, listening to those communities, because they know what they need.
They do, yes.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing more and more of that, and Events like this help support that. But yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, so I think to go off of that, and one thing I have found is to help build trust, we need that transparency too on what's happening, and where we can go, right? And what do we really need from one another? And I think being okay with that vulnerability of saying we can't do it all, right? I have a limited scope of practice within military nutrition, and my focus is on these service members. So I need community partners. I need collaborators like yourselves, right, to help bring in extra perspective or that external piece that I might not necessarily have or offer. So transparency in that, and I think stepping into what we don't know is okay. But then knowing now who to call, right, is a big aspect of that, and at least from my perspective, what's going to help continue to push trust in those efforts forward.
Thank you. Selena, you work with centers of excellence all over the world, and I know for them to collaborate, there needs to be trust. Trust in the work that you're doing, trust in the work that they're all trying to give input to.
Yeah, absolutely. So building on what you all said, I think, for the engagement is really important, is to co-create and have a really participatory model. So we're not just saying this is what you need to do, but we're really setting the agenda together and really listening to the partners. But beyond listening, also co-creating, really developing priorities together and empowering our partners and really having shared goals and shared vision and shared power.
And these are paradigm shifts that I think, 10 years ago we would not have thought that they could come about, but they're happening very naturally, I feel like, in a lot of ways. You mentioned participatory models of research. I think, again, 10, 15 years ago, scientists like yourself wouldn't have been able to do that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it is so refreshing that there has been this paradigm shift where, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, if you wrote a grant, you wouldn't be able to have a community member as an investigator listed on your grant. And it's so refreshing now that it's actually encouraged by many organizations and foundations. And so there really has been a shift in the system, recognizing the importance of diverse voices and who's at the table.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Danny, could I also add, I'm also seeing shifts from philanthropy in terms of what they are asking when they give dollars to local communities. Honestly, there's been a lot of trauma that is, I think, inflicted to these organizations by all they have to do to receive money and receive it from the federal government. So I am seeing more of that. Could there be even more? Definitely. But I think that's an important shift, is that trust-based philanthropy that's starting to build.
Absolutely. Major Diemer, you mentioned a word that I don't think often comes up enough, and that's this issue of being vulnerability. And I think we all sort of need to learn from that. Can you touch on that a little bit more?
Sure, yeah. So in my current capacity, I'm an instructor. I'm a research director for our master's program in nutrition, and so one of my teaching philosophies is I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. And that's okay.
Right.
But again, I know who to call. And so I think that's just probably a motto more I live by, and that I encourage the students that I work with and my partners in other projects is ask the questions, right? There's no such thing as a silly question, but if you have the question, someone else does. So bring it up, right? It's okay. And so that's probably more of where I'm coming from. And the more we can be open and honest about that, I think the more we can actually collaborate and understand where we can leverage each other's resources in partnerships further.
Yeah, that honesty, that trust that we've already
absolutely.
talked about. Selena, I want to come back to you. We'll be talking more about this over the next few days, but when we're talking about, finding foods that are nutritious, obviously, but they also need to be culturally relevant. And how does your work sort of help uplift those culturally relevant foods that are delicious, nutritious, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're looking at a lot of national food composition databases around the world, one of the shortcomings has been that they haven't included edible biodiversity of more underutilized foods, of land races, unique land races that farmers have in their fields. Often, for example, we think about corn, we think about one specific variety, whereas there's hundreds of different varieties. So often that knowledge is not really captured in databases. And then because we don't know, we can't promote those foods. And so what we're doing with the Periodic Table of Food Initiative is really trying to understand what is in food of all the foods on the planet. There are over 33,000 edible plant species, and we probably have an understanding of comprehensively less than 2,000 of them. And so it's really trying to celebrate all of those foods around the world that are culturally relevant.
And
for different communities.
Right, and we celebrate them not just because they're delicious, culturally relevant, but they're resilient, right? These are the foods of the future in so many ways. They're the foods of the past, but they're also the foods of the future.
That's a great point. So often when we think about the future of food, we think about innovating, but we can also look back at innovations of the past and those crops and species that have withstood like climate shifts and are adapted to so many different situations.
Thank you. In the few minutes that we have left, I'm hoping we can ask you all to give a call to action to the audience. I want to make sure that everyone comes away feeling hopeful that they know what to do with this information. I don't want to pick on anyone first, so whoever feels compelled.
I've talked a lot about partnership. We all have. And I guess I would say, I think, like no other time before, now is a time to stand with partners. There are some really fantastic groups doing really challenging work at the local level. They're vulnerable. They're standing up for what they believe is right at a time when a lot of organizations are being told what is not okay to talk about, what words aren't okay to say. And so, I think having a partner mindset and not just thinking about partnership as transactional, but, how are you really showing up for your partner, I think is what I am often asking myself. And so I would really ask everyone is, are you showing up for your partners? Because that's so important right now.
Thank you. Major Diemer. You can clap.
So for me, I think, right, it's just extending the partnerships here, going off what Rachel said, right? Nutrition is my mission, nutrition is our mission. So knowing that the military is there, right, and military nutrition is meaningful as a part of national security. And so really my call to action is just to continue supporting these partnerships so that we can learn from you and therefore apply that information to our warfighters and their family members and maintain a safe and healthy country as it is.
Thank you, Major Diemer. Selena, you get the last word.
Yeah, my call to action is to take bold action. So much of what we do is thinking and developing knowledge, studying knowledge, having ideas, and I think it's really the moment to implement, to translate, and to really have impact. So taking bold action is my call to action, and having those unconventional, unexpected partnerships in that journey.
All those unusual suspects coming together, unusual collaborations. Take bold action. Now is the time to stand with your partners and stand up for your partners. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you all so much. Another round of applause as they exit, please.